I am Chris Gros, and joined as always here by Jack Hall. And today, if you watched yesterday, you know that is going to be our deep dive here into the Larry Millete murder trial. We are going to be having our two reporters who really covered the ins, the outs, all of the pre-trial hearings that we had. You'll see right now in our wide shot, everybody has their laptops. We've also got our water bottles because it's expected to be a long conversation. But want to thank Kelly Hessedal and Jenny Day here for taking some time out of their schedules to join us here on Right Now. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Jack, let's dive right into this because this is a story that captivated our area. Then it turned into a national and international story, and that would be the disappearance, of course, of Maya Millete, the wife of Millete, that later turned into a murder trial.
Yeah, 5-year process. We've been, talking about this for a while. We, as a station, have been covering the disappearance, the investigation, the searches, the arrest of Larry Millete, the preliminary hearings. This is a 5-year process, about 5.5 years, almost to the day, to when we got this verdict. So a long time coming here, of course. For those of you who are wondering where we were last week, we appreciate your patience. Just know that we had a great conversation ahead waiting for you. So we hope that this is something that you guys enjoy, a good recap, sights and sounds of the courtroom, because so far, I mean, we saw it in the live coverage, but here on our show, we love to have Jenny on. We love to have Kelly on so that we're able to break down the sights and the sounds, because we have eyes in the courtroom. Finally, we're able to not just go off of notes. So we have this opportunity here. So let's dive in. Chris, let me let you set the stage before we bring Kelly and Jenny on.
Yeah, sure. So after, again, a lot of speculation about exactly what would happen here with Larry Millete in this murder trial, he was found guilty of first-degree murder. I was off last week. So you were talking about, again, this show that was not on last week. I remember tuning in as a viewer to the 3:30 show, and I saw our Kelly Hessedal live.
I was
outside.
driving. I pulled over.
And
I sat on the curb for an hour just watching the coverage of it.
I remember tuning in and just thinking, wow. And I had my thoughts. The verdict came this fast. I mean, even though you're off, I have my work phone. I try my best to kind of keep it in a drawer when I'm on like vacation, but I could not help but notice, obviously, teams. We had our story desk editor saying that we've got a verdict that's in. We're waiting, and I tune into the coverage and I see Kelly and Jenny, and I know as a reporter what's going through their minds. They're like, we're live. We've got to do these live hits, but we got to get inside to the courtroom. And eventually we got that verdict. Now, deliberations were not entirely long, not based on what it is that we potentially thought, maybe some of the analysis that we were getting. There was the fear, obviously, from maybe those that thought that this was the right result, that if they went to a break, because there was no court on Friday, they had the weekend, that Monday, maybe it would then result in even longer deliberation process. But I believe they ordered lunch, as we say.
Which we've heard is sometimes a sign.
Sometimes a sign. And we eventually did get that verdict. And, of course, this being a trial in which there were no cameras allowed inside, we had to rely very heavily on our two reporters that were in there each and every day. So let's go ahead and bring in now, obviously, Kelly Hessedal, Jenny Day. You've heard them. You've seen them on your TV. You've seen, Jenny, you've made a couple of appearances here on our show weekly. Yeah. Kelly, you joined us once for what was a very kind of a preview for what was going to be this day as soon as the prosecution rested their case. So I guess one by one first, let's just go ahead and get your thoughts. The reaction to hearing that verdict had come in, and I think it's fair to say relatively quickly compared to what maybe we thought, and then the actual result itself.
Sure. I mean, I was sitting in the parking lot with my photographer, Jay Erdman, was there in the back seat, and we're just eating lunch. I had just been having a conversation with Annette, one of Mary Chris's friends, and we're talking about the trial and the case and how we're all hanging out there. She told me Mary Chris left for a little while and was going to come back. So, everything seemed fine. I'm sitting there eating my lunch, typing on my computer, and I see that notification come up that from Emily Cox, the courtroom liaison, and I open it up, and it says, just 4 words of, a verdict is in. And I literally was holding my computer and I shoved it. I threw it and I screamed. I was like, oh my God, oh my God. I got out of the car. Jay's like, what's going on? I'm like, oh my God. And all the people behind us, all the Mary Chris's friends, had their chairs set up, were sitting behind us, kind of like camping out in the parking lot. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God. They were like, what? Because they hadn't heard yet. They were like, Mary Chris doesn't even know about this. They got her on the phone, on speakerphone. And she's going, what? And I'm like, a verdict is in. She's like, oh my God. She starts screaming. She's like, I'm on my way there. I'm on my way there. So I call, of course, our managing editor, Barb. I'm like, oh my gosh. She's like, okay, calm down. We're going to get through this. But it was just such a shock that it came back as fast as it did. I mean, we'd all been talking, of course, about how long do you think it's going to take? Will it be Friday? Or, I mean, will it be Monday? Will it be Tuesday? No way is it going to happen Thursday. I think that's what a lot
texted me
of us
Wednesday
said.
night because for this show specifically, I said, I want to get a vibe check. Tell me what you think is going to happen. Is this something that we're going to be able to cover as it happens or the day after on our show? So Wednesday night, I want to say. I think so, the night before. You text me and you're like, there's no way this is happening tomorrow. I go into work on Thursday. Our executive producer's like, there's no way. And one of our other producers was like, if you say it one more time, it's going to happen. Lo and behold, here
As
we are.
I was getting dressed, I'm trying to decide what to wear, and I'm like, I'll just wear something simple, like a black dress. Nobody cares. And then I thought in my head, I'm like, I'm going to wear this, and then the verdict's going to come in. And I pushed the thought out and said, no, it'll be fine. And of course, what happened?
So with that being said, Jenny, I want to ask you. So there seemed to be a bit, it was a surprise for a lot of people, for us specifically, because of course we are trying to cover this from a journalistic angle, but we're also spectators. And we've had these conversations amongst ourselves, like we just mentioned. There's no way we were surprised about this. You spoke to a couple of jurors here, and I'm going to play some sound here in just a second before I'll give you the moment to answer this question. I'll play the sound first, but after that, I want to ask, what was, we'll hear what they say, but from the other conversations that you have, I just want a little bit more insight to the sound we're about to hear. So we'll play it, and I'll pitch it back to you.
If he wouldn't have done the spell cast, we probably wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't have this decision. What he did, when the Wiccans come into court and tell you that we wanted away from him, when you have a group that had blocked him, and then you have another one that has come in, Frank Peavy, that says, look, I was just trying to be nice so he couldn't give me a bad review, and until he wanted to get, that says something when they even want to get away. But no, he out of his mind, he put it all on paper, and it was devastating.
That he was gone, that those 11 hours, 20 minutes, that nobody knew where he was. That was part of it. The hemlock. There was a lot of evidence.
Before I ask the question again, I'll rephrase it. But you get two different emotions. You get kind of relief that, I'm fully convinced this happens. Then it kind of feels like exhaustion at that point, because you can't imagine being, weeks of trial, all these deliberations, all the things to consider, but all the things that we've talked about throughout our conversation, the spell casting, the hemlock, the disappearance. This is stuff that we've known for a long time, and it was just more of a question of how is the prosecution going to put this story together in the eyes of the jury in the situation where there's no body. So when it comes to the jurors outside of those sound bites, what else did you hear from them?
I think there was just so much circumstantial evidence that they could not get around. They pointed to the spell cast there. You see also the time away, nearly 12 hours the day after she disappeared, leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning, telling Maya's brother that he had gone to work, then changing his story, saying that he had gone to the beach with his young son. There was just too much to get around. And so, yes, I myself also just very shocked by how quickly the verdict came in. We're talking less than 6 hours. I was told by the juror that right when they got into the deliberation room, they each gave themselves 3 minutes to go around the room, talk about the evidence that they felt was the strongest, things that they just could not get around. And then they took a vote by paper. And they all immediately, first round, were in agreement, first degree premeditated murder. And so I think at that point, they did their due diligence. They rewatched some of the surveillance footage. They reread some of the notes. They re-examined things. And then they were already in agreement. And so there just wasn't much to discuss after that. Again, it was a unanimous decision that Larry planned the death of Maya. And I think for the family, I always want to keep such a focus on Maya. I think it was such a confirmation for them. Again, the state, the county, no one had even declared her dead after 5.5 years. So of course the family assumed the worst, but that was confirmation for them that this man is convicted of killing her, therefore she is dead. It seems so obvious, but I think it was just a heavy moment for everyone. Gives me goosebumps right now to be like, this is reality.
There was a moment in your interview, Kelly, and we'll play that in a little bit, but you spoke with her sister, Mari Chris, who's been such a pivotal, liaison person, advocate for the family and throughout this entire process, where she simply says, there's no winning in this for them. That really stuck with me in hearing that. But I do want to ask you guys, going back to the jury, the instructions by the judge, Judge Camarena, how much do you think that was pivotal towards the speed in which we saw? And I'm not even sure that there would be different instructions from a different judge, but it did seem to sort of like put everything that we were hearing, which was this very not convoluted, but complicated theory. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. Yeah. And he really boiled it down to two questions. Was Larry responsible for her death, and is she dead?
Right.
And they answered those questions.
Well, and I think it's important to remember the jurors are just humans like all of us, right? So when the judge is spouting off several minutes of instructions and you're sitting there trying to make sure you understand everything, so are they. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, these are human beings that looked at this 8 weeks or whatever it was of evidence. And I think for the prosecution, what got kind of scary for them toward the end was like, some of that got pretty dry at some points. Like beating him over the head with some of this stuff, like the text messages between Genesis and Larry, and all the cell phone data and stuff, that you kind of started to worry, like, is the real message here from the prosecution going to get lost?
Yes.
Is it too much? Are you overwhelming them? Right. But obviously in the end, it didn't matter because they came back so quickly with the verdict. So I think, I think that the instructions sure made a difference, that they didn't have to agree on exactly how she died. It was all circumstantial. But at the same time, I think in their minds, that was the question, right? Just, is she dead? And did he do it?
Jenny, when you're talking with the jurors, I know that, again, circumstantial evidence is what we use, but did you get the feeling that those that you spoke with, there was no doubt in their decision?
Yeah, I think it was just there were too many examples. Again, him being out of the house for nearly 12 hours the next day, turning his cell phone off. They have proof that it was at 80-something% still. So he had turned it off. The phone was not actually dead. 444 miles unaccounted for on the car. That's actually an area that I personally struggle with. Again, Kelly and I sat in this trial for 2 months straight, listening as if we were jurors almost. Again, just feet away from Larry. Both sides, Maya and Larry's sides, were in court every single day. And I personally wish that there had been surveillance video of some kind showing him actually driving out to the desert, is where they claim that he has buried her body. Again, I've learned a lot through this, that our checkpoints, our freeway surveillance is only saved for 90 days. They did not request that footage for about 7 months after she disappeared. So I think that, a lot of times jurors want a smoking gun. They want that forensic evidence that's just no doubt in your mind. But I think the circumstantial here was just so mounting. Again, the spell cast, even, what a unique angle. The defense claimed all along he was just obsessively trying to save his marriage. But they even show over the timeline, he started making those spell requests several months before she disappeared. There were about 25 a day. The day that she disappeared, there were up to 400 spell requests. Right. And then the day after she disappeared, now we know the day after she was killed, there were none. There were no spellcast requests. And then the next day, they started going to put a hex on her affair partner. And so I think there was just so much, even like the fact that she could have left on her own. She was an incredible mom, and there was testimony after testimony that she would have never left her children. That very next day, they were set to go to Big Bear for her daughter's birthday to go snowboarding. I mean, she had filed for divorce. Again, the prosecution just went over and over that this woman had plans for the future.
Yeah.
Well, and I also felt like in the closing, right, like her closing, Christy's closing, went on for a long time, that I worried again, are you overwhelming them? Should you be bearing it down to just a few points and really hitting hard? Sure. But the thing that I thought she did that was so great was that in the rebuttal, the two things that really struck me, one, hey, suddenly Larry, he cares so much about more Maya is, so he's blowing up Patricia Laird's phone, and then the day after she's gone, it's like, oh, I'm just going to give her some space. Like that was so like
It just didn't match.
telling, very
Right.
telling. And she
Right.
put that in the end, like this guy who's so controlling, he's taking notes on when his wife goes to Walmart, that suddenly now he just doesn't care where she is after she's gone.
Right.
A long period of behavior up until
Yes.
January 7th, and then January
just
8th, it's
suddenly
like he's a
stops.
different
Yeah.
person. How do you parse that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what she put out there. Like, who do you believe here? And I thought it was so great that the jurors seemed to be just in lockstep with so many things that I had thought of too,
Yeah.
that it was like, wow, the prosecution really did its job here and making sure to
Yep.
thread the needle in all of these pieces, despite the fact there was so much stuff, they really got it.
You bring up a good point, because that's something that I was wondering was, would the spell casting, because I remember, I'm sure you do too, when that first came out to us, when we first saw the shrine that had been built, and we had
Right.
found out, and
Right.
I'm talking early on, post
This
his
is
arrest.
like his arrest. Yep,
This
this
is
is
like
when
his
it came out,
arrest,
yep.
right? And everybody in the newsroom saw these photos and we're like,
Right.
whoa, this is like
Very unusual, yeah.
deeply dark stuff. And I think what happened though in the court, when I started seeing the spell casting, and maybe this is just sort of me and time had gone by, I started to worry if that would come off as sort of sensationalism. That this was, online spell casting. Like, because at first when we saw the shrine, we didn't really know what was going
Right.
on there. I believe there was wondering if that was like her blood. Like there
Right.
was,
And we still don't know.
and we still don't know.
Yeah.
So I was very interested in that the spell casting in particular with that one juror, that really stuck with her.
Right.
That wasn't seen as sort of wishy-washy sensationalism, or that he was being scammed online. Because that is sort of how I interpreted a lot of it. Like, wow, he paid for 400 spells. Like, what did he
even
think that he was
shipping,
getting?
shipping
And
on
shipping. Like, what
spells.
is he thinking is going on? Is this someone who is going through a tough time versus like this is someone who is doing something? But I think there's that drop off
Yeah.
that we're talking about. Not even drop off, disappearance of
Well,
activity.
I think we have to keep in mind that what we know as reporters and as news people is not
Doesn't
the same
always
thing
get
that the
to-
public knows.
right.
Like, so we've heard about it so much. So to us, it's like old news. We've heard
Yeah.
about this for 5 years. The guy
That's a
did some
great
spells. So what? You're replaying and hitting us in the face over
Yeah.
and over, the jurors, with all of these spells, right? So we get a little bit like, okay, we've all been there, done that. We want to hear something new. But these jurors were supposed to be people that had not ever really followed
Yeah.
the coverage. They were
Yeah.
supposed to be an older audience who wasn't
Yeah.
on social media, right? So we have to keep that
Yeah,
in mind too,
that's a very
right?
good point. Yeah.
And Kelly, I think an interesting part too about the jurors, like there was so much that they were not involved with. It was
Yeah.
open court. We were allowed to be there and sit through this. The public as well, the family, hearing about a lot of contention about what they could and could not include. They had to be so careful with their word. There was an objection every few seconds
Right.
because they just had to be so careful to not put anyone else on trial.
Right.
And, I think it was interesting, though, to still just get a unanimous verdict so quickly when
Right.
there was so much that they were told they couldn't include.
And along those lines, I just want to go back to the juror for a moment because she was amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
But what was so interesting to me is that a lot of us were so interested in hearing from Jamie Laird and from Patricia Laird,
Yeah.
right? Because we've heard
Be a fair
about
partner.
Jamie
Yeah.
for 5 years
Yeah.
now and all been wondering, like, who is this guy? But I thought it was fascinating that they got it, that in the sense of, like, there was nothing to see there, right? Like the jury was not swayed at all by the fact she had an affair and here's the guy and here's the other lady. I mean, their testimony mattered, right? To be able to put to bed and put to rest those ideas that these two had something to do with where she was. So I understand why the prosecution
Yeah.
had to call them. But it was so interesting to me that the jury was kind of like, nah, so what? She
Yeah,
had
it
an
felt
affair.
very
Big deal.
insignificant.
Right,
like,
very.
But yeah.
Right.
The juror who I spoke with, actually, when I asked what witnesses stuck out to you, again, this is a over 7-week-long trial. Prosecution called 67 witnesses. The defense took just 1 day for their argument, calling just 3 witnesses. And so this juror who I spoke with, she said that Genesis Tabalanza, she is married to Maya's brother. She said her testimony really stuck out because she said Maya told her specifically, if anything were to happen to me, it is Larry. And then she said Patricia Laird's testimony also stuck out to her. She is a sheriff's deputy.
Yep.
The timeline of it all too. She was giving birth the night that Maya died. She was
Right.
having their first child.
Yep.
And she did testify that Jamie was there at the hospital.
Which we know there's photos of those.
Yes.
That the jury never got to see them.
Yeah. And it was interesting though because they, the defense all along wanted wanted to kind of suggest maybe that his alibi hadn't been thoroughly investigated, kind of suggesting shoddy work by Chula Vista police. But like you said, it didn't change their mind.
Right.
I almost do want to jump into you mentioned Chula Vista police because, and I don't know how much of this has been, not verified, but sort of supported, but there were frustrations with the speed in which it took to arrest Larry.
Sure.
I guess, and this would sort of just be,
9 months,
conjecture, 9 months. How big of a win this is for the Chula Vista Police Department that this resulted in a guilty verdict.
I mean,
at
we
least
have to
for
keep
now.
in mind she started out as a missing person.
Right.
And
Yes.
think about it. Hundreds, thousands of people go
And this was
missing
this was
every day.
concern and frustration coming from her family.
Sure.
Yeah.
As any of us would be with our own
correct, yep.
families,
And
right?
we hear this often
Right,
with
right.
missing people.
And you're right, and some of them turn up.
Yep.
And so I'm sure for the police, it was this balancing act of how far do we go putting resources
Yeah.
into going after a woman that potentially could have left on her
Correct.
own and is about
Yes.
to come home,
Yeah.
right? So I think we have to look at it through the lens of that. But yeah, 3 months, 4 months before they really started honing in. And I don't know how much circumstantial evidence they'd already gathered at that
Right.
point to really start going down this road of getting as much as possible, pulling the cell phone data and all that. I mean, we kind of saw the timeline at trial because they were talking about like at this date we pulled these records and at this date we did this search and that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I think for a family, sure, it was late. No matter how you look at it, they wanted it done the day of,
Yeah.
which
We
you can
still don't know
understand.
where she is.
Right.
Yeah.
And had they done it earlier, maybe we would have a better chance of knowing. If they had tracked his car
Right.
the
Yeah.
day after she disappeared. I mean, how much does that
But
really
how much-
actually happen?
Yeah.
Like how much, do they immediately start putting trackers on somebody that could be suspicious?
You mentioned a win for the Chula Vista Police Department, but just for the prosecution
Yeah.
in general, because of course, I mean, in retrospect, of course, it was such an easy deliberation process, but you and I, off camera, were not necessarily, I would say, voicing concerns, but we were acknowledging that the lack of a smoking gun. Obviously, the judge made it to where it wasn't as necessary as we perhaps had thought it would be prior to the case, but we were thinking about it, and it's like, okay, there's a little bit of details here. Oh, it could be this. What are the loud bangs? Oh, well, there's the hemlock. What about the hemlock? But it kind of just felt like that through line was just non-existent in that there was just it was just ripe for reasonable doubt to take hold. It felt like that at times. So to see the way in which it was able to be wrapped up, summarized, and closing arguments, the way in which we were able to see just how quickly the jury was able to deliberate, I think that if you're one of the prosecutors or if you're the team right now, you are very happy with this result, because
man.
there were moments where
They
it
were
felt
very
like
emotional.
this was not as open and closed as perhaps some people may have considered going into it. There were moments where we started to sit there and we were like, there's an avenue that clearly exists here where Larry gets acquitted in some way.
Right.
Of course,
Or
that
if
ended
a
up
hung
not
jury.
being
Or a
Right.
hung jury. I don't know
jury.
if ever acquittal.
Maybe
was
that, and that's what I
necessary.
meant to say. But nonetheless, there was an avenue to where a guilty verdict was not necessarily the only option we were here to
Correct.
consider.
Yeah.
Or even a lesser charge.
Right.
Lesser.
That's
Rather
that's an
than-
interesting
Right.
part
Yeah.
too.
It's so true because second degree murder, again, they could talk about it. There were several different charges, from second degree murder, to involuntary manslaughter, saying that maybe he accidentally poisoned her. So they had a long list of charges to consider. Again, first degree is that he planned this, because I even had that thought, maybe, okay, she literally contacted a divorce attorney that very day. Maybe he snapped and it was a heat of passion kind of thing, which would be second degree, which carries 15 years instead of 25. So again, though, they did not have to agree on how she may have been killed,
Right.
just that it was planned. And we both have been in talks with their family. They are still hopeful that prior to sentencing, some kind of deal can be worked out where Larry has to reveal where her body is. So.
Just going back to the closing, and the prosecution, though, when you mentioned that, you know how it is, like when somebody goes before you and they hit it out of the ballpark and you're kind of like, oh, now I have to go next.
Yeah.
Kind of like that. I mean,
Yeah.
just to give you a sense of what it was like between the two, I mean, prosecution went and it went as expected to a certain extent. But then the close, defense attorney, Leanne Sabatini, stepped up to the mic and was like, let's just talk. I'm not going to show you some PowerPoint. Let's just talk. And it was very compelling and very engaging. So after that, and they were celebrating in the parking lot, I was not shocked when I saw that. You know, for
The
that,
defense.
right?
Yeah.
The defense. They were high-fiving, they were hugging. She was dancing out there in the parking lot after the closing. And then for the prosecution to go up again with rebuttal, and it was okay at first, and we were kind of like watching. And you know, some people thought they didn't do the greatest job at rebuttal. I thought she buttoned it up really well in the end, but it was a very different style and a different approach. So it's kind of like that, you know, the person who shows up with all the answers to something, but maybe they don't deliver it in the same sort of suave style that somebody does. And you wondered which way were they going to go with that.
And I think that one of the things that you guys in particular did such a good job of, and you're doing a great job of now, is that no cameras allowed in the courtroom. And I think that so often right now, especially because of court TV. So, I mean, so much of my early career in news was covering the George Zimmerman case and the Casey Anthony case as an intern.
I didn't know that you covered Casey Anthony.
It was while I was an intern in Orlando. I didn't cover it. I wasn't doing live reports. Sorry, but I was at the Orlando courthouse. Like this was, and you see these live TV trucks. And you have these 24/7 feeds of reporters, and these are international cases that are getting this live coverage. You're brought into the newsroom. You're seeing these performances. We didn't get to see those. This was closed off, and I cannot highlight enough how much people's sort of perception of courtroom drama now is simply because of court TV and then obviously Hollywood.
Sure.
But you guys did such a good job, and you just did now, of just sort of explaining, you know, how pivotal closing arguments were.
Right. And to be quite honest, like Jenny and I have talked about this many times, like you guys even, whenever I would talk to people out in the public, people constantly would tell me they didn't think the prosecution had proved their case, even with everything we were getting. And to me, and I don't know if it's just because I've covered it for so long and I'm this close to knowing what the evidence or whatever it was, but like I was shocked when people would tell me they didn't think there was enough evidence. And I'm like, if you'd been sitting in the courtroom, you'd feel differently. And I think that highlights what you're saying, is that seeing it for yourself, experiencing it for yourself, the witnesses, the demeanor, how much that impacts somebody on a human level, and just how much it can impact a jury too. I mean, I was so glad. I mean, I wasn't glad, but I was just very interested when the juror talked about Larry and his demeanor. And because I wondered, I'm like, are they going to look at this guy and think, oh, as Leanne described him, he's just a little puppy dog. And
she went as far as saying that he was the one who had been abused.
Right. And I was like, are they going to think that too? And when she called him a master manipulator, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, because, you know, us not being in the courtroom, we kind of had this view of it like a checklist. It's like, okay, these are the things that if you're the prosecution, you have to mention.
Sure.
And I didn't see a whole lot of check pluses. I saw check minuses. I'm like, okay, you covered this topic, but it just kind of felt like there was just a little bit more meat on the bone that you just, because of a lack of whatever this form of evidence might be in this particular instance, you just weren't able to gnaw off that last bit of meat that was off the bone. So it just kind of felt like there was just this like resonant feeling that there was just a tiny bit more left to be desired. How do we explain the stain in the car that was not necessarily blood? We don't know.
We don't know what it was.
There needed to be a second test on it. You know, we hear gunshots, we hear hemlock. There's two different options.
The freezer that nobody ever like really talked about, but it turned out, it sounds like it was a coincidence. She just came to get the freezer the day after Maya disappeared, but we saw a picture of it. It was small. Yeah. Like a small freezer, and nobody brought it up.
And I think so much of it was just they would dangle evidence and then kind of let the jurors do with, like, think what they will. Like there were some parts of it where I was like, well, what were the results of this?
Which in hindsight was a very effective strategy.
Where is it now?
You know?
Sure, that is true. Like the 444 miles. So when we were comparing notes, one of the days when they were talking about these missing miles or unaccounted for miles, right? And then they said, he was in Blythe or whatever. They just mentioned it. And I was like, well, did they have evidence that he was in Blythe? Like, what was it? Was it a receipt that he got gas? I'm like, how did they know?
We didn't miss anything.
And then it turned out that the prosecution, I guess this came out during the preliminary, the reason they found those unaccounted miles and figured out it was Blythe, they were doing tests of their own. Like, they had these missing miles, and then they started driving and like figuring mileage out. And I think speculatively came up with Blythe, though they don't know for a fact that's
Right.
where she was,
Yeah.
or for a fact that's where he went. But yeah, no evidence was ever shown that he was actually there. It's just, hey, it makes sense. You know,
Right.
all the
mileage, the gas in the car, I mean, even him plugging in his home address into the GPS. He says he's at the beach. He plugs in his home address into the GPS, and he's
Who
2.5
knows where he is, yeah.
hours away. So, I mean, there's just all these little, again, all circumstantial, but it was just mounting.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating. Back to the jurors. I mean, again, 12 strangers doing their best to listen to, at times, like you said, there was painstaking testimony of like how cell phone towers work. And I just applaud them. They really, they paid close attention. You know, we saw them craning their necks to look at pieces of evidence, taking notes.
Right. But it was
Yeah.
interesting because Beverly ended up being the one that I knew was going to talk. 'Cause she was the one there that was constant like this. Like during testimony and like during closing.
You had
like
her picked out.
Like especially,
Yeah.
remember when the therapist came? There was a a therapist expert or a therapy expert or whatever was testifying about domestic violence
Yes.
and domestic abuse. Beverly was the one in the courtroom going like this. Yeah. Like during and who knows I don't know what her background is or anything, but it was fascinating.
Yeah,
to
she
me.
has a business background. I'm actually going to be talking with her later today. She said we've stayed in touch, and she is going to do an interview again today, actually, to talk about, because she said she is, you know, understandably kind of become now a little obsessed with the case and just what they weren't told in court.
Yes.
You know, just all of it.
Yeah.
She was just, I'm eager to chat with her more today. That'll be at 5 and 6 tonight.
But I would say also the stuff that they didn't see, it's not like they would have come to a different verdict.
Got it.
Right? You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the Jamie Laird photos, like those videos of Maya and Larry fighting that we saw during the prelim.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember that? It
I
was
do,
like
yeah.
she was shot from her bedroom and like you could just hear them arguing. Like I thought those would have been compelling for the prosecution to bring in because it's like the only time you ever would have heard Maya's voice at
Yeah.
the trial. And on a human level, what that would have done for the jury.
Humanizes it just that extra
reminding
bit more.
you she's a person, she's a mother, this is what she was going through at the time, but they excluded it. They excluded that. They excluded the blood stain in the bathroom, though nobody ever knows whose blood that was or you know what that was all about. So yeah, there were things that were excluded, but I don't think it obviously hurt the case.
I think all of us want to know, you know, what that blood stain was, what actually happened. Was it poison? Was she shot? Was she strangled? And again, sadly, it doesn't matter that, like Mary Chris said, there is no win here. But, you know, for the defense, they did bring in dogs trained to detect human remains, never got a hit. There was no blood other than the drop you're talking about in the bathroom that could have been anyone's and just a normal incident. But, yeah, I think... I hope that we find out one day.
But we got to take a break here.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Can I ask one more
Sure,
question,
go
though?
ahead,
Because
yeah.
I this is one that I'm interested in because, you know, the jury itself is something that is a chess match when we're doing these hearings. You know, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was 7 women, 5 men,
correct.
right? People pay attention to gender, race, socioeconomic background, to things that could determine if you're a prosecuting attorney or if you're a defense attorney, what gives me the best edge. Right. Now, we know that this involves domestic abuse. We know that traditionally, if you're from the prosecution's perspective, the more women, the better, because you genuinely would expect them to be more sympathetic. Do you think that played a role here in this?
I think that's tough to say because they had really good poker faces. Other than Beverly,
Right, the whole time.
you really couldn't read much at all on how they were taking the testimony. Sure, they were attentive.
Yeah.
You know, I did see a couple of them sleeping a couple times because it got really long some of those days. But for the most part, I honestly... I was surprised that it
I agree that it
happened
was-
that fast
yeah.
and that was that quick of a
Yeah,
consensus.
I definitely agree. And it was, I think we really don't know exactly, but like the collective age might have been even around 70 plus.
Some, yeah. Some were probably in their 50s.
Oh,
maybe.
I just mean like
Right.
overall, like
Right.
on average.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that they just were paying close attention. And you're right. Like we spent 2 months with these people and we did not speak a word to them.
We were very careful about that. We got
Right.
worried all the time. Are they around us? Are they around
Yeah.
us?
So mindful
Yeah.
to be very respectful of letting the case play out on its own.
Very key there. Okay. All right. We are going to take a quick break here.
Okay.
We're going to jump back in 2 minutes, and we're going to want to sort of look ahead. We're going to jump into the conversation that you had with Mary Chris as well, but we'll do that here after about 2 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Here, this is Right Now. We are in the midst, and you are watching a pretty good in-depth conversation here that I'm sure we will kind of splice together. It's been amazing. It's flown by. We've got maybe about 10, 15 minutes here left. We'll kind of adjust and see how things go. I know, yeah. Come back for part 2.
Right.
So smash that like and subscribe button. We will be going ahead and posting this, though, in its entirety, and you guys will be able to get all of that. But I did want to take this time here to look ahead, because a lot of this story was so much focused on the search for Maya. Yeah. I remember explicitly being in the South Bay. And again, we say Chula Vista, Mom, but this is like really far east Chula Vista. Like, for a lot of people that are unfamiliar with the area, that neighborhood has a lot of hiking trails that were there. I can't remember if it was January 10th or 11th, but I remember being there in the morning as a morning reporter for one of the first searches. And David Gottfredson, our now retired longtime investigative reporter and producer, texting me, drive by the house and see if Larry is there. And at the time, I just remember thinking, well, the husband's going to be searching, right?
Of course he'd be searching, right?
Never was.
They testified that he did not take part in one search. The defense said that he was responsible for taking care of the children and let everyone else search, but he did not.
And I remember that being a subject with Mari Chris and Richard as well, too. And so I turn now to say, Jenny, you mentioned that there might be a deal here on the table for Larry to reveal her body's location, but the search for her body still remains. And that was something that Mari Chris and Richard touched on in your interview, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's such an uphill battle. Like, gosh, I have never been out to that area. Jenny, have you been?
Yeah.
It's literally like the middle of nowhere.
So
they
Are you guys talking about Blythe? Or
Yes.
that area of
Colorado
Blythe,
River.
I think that's what they're going to hone in on. And here's the other part that's kind of interesting is I'm not even sure that Mary Chris's family knew that's where the DA's office was searching.
I was surprised
I think
by that
they
too,
found out a lot of information from the trial, and I get it. Like, the prosecution wanted to keep all their cards close because who knows what could have happened had people found out or they saw, who knows? They don't want people out there messing around in case something
very
they were to
sensitive
find.
case,
Absolutely. So, but it's so interesting that like they didn't even know probably, and so now they're going to be heading out there on their own and conducting their own searches. But it's like, to think that it's already been 5 years, and I know they're never going to give up hope, and I wouldn't either if I were them.
Yeah.
But how is this ever going to happen? That you have to wonder. Like,
I hope just cadaver dogs. I mean, there are volunteers. I even told, Maya's brother, I said, when you need a call for volunteers, like, this community will show up.
Right.
So many of you have already helped search, attended vigils. I mean, I think we still need answers, and the family says that they are committed to searching. I know in your interview, Kelly, with her, Mary Chris, that she just thanked our community for never giving
let's
up.
Let's actually play that really quick, because this is not immediately after the verdict, but this is a few days after, correct?
Well, this is the day after.
This is the day after. Okay, thank you. So setting the scene, of course, a lot of emotions. So take a listen to what she had to say here.
It was a mixed emotion. I like really praying hard, it's please not to, it's had to be not guilty, it's like just praying hard. And when they did say, it's guilty, I felt a little bit relief. I was glad that it was, it was a guilty verdict. But at the same time, I'm like feeling that sadness in my heart, because it's still a tragedy on our family. My sister's not here. It just kind of confirmed that she's no longer with us, although we've known it since 5 years ago. It's just that confirmation.
And of course, that search is continuing right now.
And I had the script right here in front of me of your package. And again, I read that as she was saying that, and it really does hit you again that throughout all of this, I think there was, of course, that percentage probably changed, though I hate to put percentages on something like emotion, but there was probably that 0.001% chance that they were hoping that obviously Maya was still there.
Right, that she would walk through the doors.
And I don't even know when or how long that had gone on, because I think in all of this, their biggest wish would obviously be that Maya's still alive.
Right.
You know, one thing that really sticks out, like Christy Bowles, the deputy district attorney who led the prosecution's case, like she over and over was like, a body does not bury itself. Like this not having a body only further confirms that this was premeditated, because he should not be rewarded for having successfully buried a body. She said Maya finally got her voice and the defendant silenced it. And these are just moments that stick out in court, that just because we don't have a body, that again he should not be rewarded. But we talk about the Grand Canyon. That
that weird trip. You described it, and it was a weird trip.
Yeah, they actually think that he went back by the location of where he buried her to allegedly kind of check on things.
And it makes me wonder: did he check on the way out there, or on the way back, or did he do both?
Either way, that gives me goosebumps to think about that, right? Like the idea of revisiting the potential, area. And then, forgive me if I'm wrong, that was a trip that included the 3 kids.
Children were with them.
And they didn't talk a lot about where the youngest Lazarus was the day of, when he dumped the body there.
Gone 12 hours,
And honestly, the children were absent from this entire case. Like, they did not even really talk about them at all. And understandably. I mean, I think it was a no-win on both sides if you were to bring him in. I was told by the family, by Mary Chris's family, that the defense had actually subpoenaed the children, the older children, to come in and testify. This was before the trial, just as the trial was getting started. But they subpoena a lot of people, and doesn't obviously mean that they're going to call them, and obviously the defense didn't. But it just made you think, though, the moment I heard that, I was like, well, clearly they think that the children will help their case. That the children either must not have heard anything, or they think that the children would help their father, or whatever it was.
And Larry was contacting them and was admonished for this because he was doing it. I believe he wasn't even allowed to do it, but they were working around using his parents' cell phone and et cetera.
Yeah, it got really ugly.
It got really ugly,
and
that was the custody battle, which again was a whole nother part of this. We do want to kind of take a step forward here and look at sort of next steps here, because he's going to be due back in court on Monday, this upcoming Monday. That's on a separate weapons charge. I believe that was the possession of the assault rifle, correct? What do we know about that court proceeding and how it's going to impact sentencing?
Well, he faces a maximum of like 3 years, I believe, for this assault
for that charge.
Right. And the judge gave him the option, do you want a trial for this separate charge? And he waived the trial. So it's going to be up to the judge to decide how to go forward with this. I mean, will the prosecution say, hey, let's just drop it because we've already got this murder conviction? I don't know. But one thing I would say that's kind of interesting is the fact that if he faces a max of 3 years, I don't know if he would actually get the max, first of all. Maybe he'd get 1 or 2. But he's already served 5 years. So you're talking 25 years to life before he'd be eligible for parole. You wipe out those 5 years he's already served. 20 years from now, he'd be 64. Would the prosecution want to keep going at him and get the 60, make him 65 or 66? It's possible. I don't know. But, at this point, and even then, again, that's just eligible for parole. Doesn't mean he would be,
as we know and well have covered, it does not mean.
But it's also a guy that has no criminal history. It's not like he's a serial killer out there killing a bunch of people that you would think at 64 years old, after he served 25 years, that he would be a pretty good likely candidate for parole.
And then, of course, the other question is are we hearing anything about a appeal? Is there what are their options here for the defense?
It's going to happen, period. It happens in every murder case. That's just a standard procedure.
Do we know do we have any inklings as to what they'd be looking for specifically?
Well, the defense, from my understanding, the real thing they're going to hit hard on as to why they believe he didn't get a fair trial is because they weren't allowed to bring in the third-party culpability, which I've continued to argue. If you had been sitting in this trial, if you had heard Patricia and Jamie, even if they had been able to argue third-party culpability, it wouldn't have made a difference. The outcome, in my opinion, these two witnesses were the stars of the trial with how credible and how believable they were. I don't think it would have mattered. But the defense still has to have an argument to say this guy didn't get a fair trial and here's why. And that is going to be the most likely reason that they try to go for it.
And to be clear, the judge has to grant that appeal, correct?
It's appeals court, totally different, separate.
Totally different.
Not even these defense attorneys are not even involved. He'll have a brand new attorney. It probably will be one that's appointed to him, kind of like a public defender, most likely. But yeah, it's a whole different process.
So basically saying that the appeal can be denied obviously.
absolutely.
Yes, the
Appeals
right
get
to an
denied
appeal all the time.
probably
Just
9
wanna make
times
sure
out
we
of
go
10.
through. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good to know.
They
Absolutely.
will try a lot of things. And I'm even told that they could file a motion for appeal 10 years from now because laws change and his attorney could keep up with that, trying to find a loophole or claim. There's lots of different claims against the jury, against the judge. Again, the defense is even, their whole argument is that there is no evidence that a murder has even occurred. And so I anticipate the lengthy legal battle continues. Several years potentially.
All right, I want to kind of jump now into a little bit more like reporter's notebook type question here, because this has been obviously a very lengthy process. Still not over, as we've just said, but we get here now to the very end. We are across the finish line, at least we think so. Just your final thoughts coming out of this trial in terms of comparing it to trials you've covered in your past, stories you've covered in your past. Just where does this sort of sit with you if you've had time to sort of digest that?
I mean, I think it's definitely one of the biggest trials I've ever covered as a reporter. I've been a reporter for more than 20 years now, and certainly this one strikes me as one of the biggest I've ever covered. And I really think it's because of the emotional aspect of it, because there's 3 kids involved. For me, when I covered the arrest of Larry, the news conference where Mary Chris was there, we played the sound over and over of her crying.
Yeah.
But to be there in person and to hear the pain in her voice of just begging for like somebody to help her find her sister. And then you're thinking about the 3 kids, and she talked about the promise she made to the 3 children that she would find out what happened to their mother. And to me, what I took from that is, I want to find out what happened to your mom to prove to you, this always gets me, that she didn't leave you on her own. So that is always like stuck with me through this case. And I think for them to be able to answer some of the questions that the kids are going to have, I think it's going to mean a lot to them. It's never going to give them what they want. They're never probably going to have all the answers. But to at least be able to say, your mom didn't walk out this door and run away and just leave you on purpose.
You cry, I cry. Kelly, you've been amazing through this. I'm glad that we were able to provide this information to San Diego. I'm glad that we were able to support the family. I mean, Mary Chris personally thanked both of us for keeping Maya's story alive and getting so many people involved. And again, it's not over. So I also just... I feel for the children, no doubt about it. They are the true victims in this case. And again, just this beautiful Chula Vista mom had plans for her future. It's devastating. And I also have been covering this case since 2021 until this guilty verdict. And, again, just fascinating to see our judicial process play out. Just what we ask of people to perform their civic duty, just so interesting, just the police investigative side. I think it's just been a real lesson and just a very heavy, emotional, tense case that we sat through for 2 months. And again, we still have unanswered questions. And I just think for Larry, I'm like, boy, this could not have been worth it. It's just all around.
Well, I mean, then you start going down the road of thinking of Larry, and it's like, you're a guy who took the mother away from his children. Like, how could you do that, But we'll have to see the way the whole process plays out. Now, something else I was going to add is that these courtroom observers that would show up every single day, there was probably at least 10, 12 of them that would take seats up in the gallery, and we all know how it was like a fight, a bloodbath to even get a seat in the courtroom. It was tough. There was somebody that was a friend of Maya's that got into kind of a little dust up with one of the courtroom observers one of the day because there was not enough seats and that kind of thing. And the friend told me, and she had tears in her eyes. She was talking about this. She was like, I just want to point out the fact that this is somebody's life. This isn't meant to be courtroom like drama, like a drama unfolding on TV for you. This is somebody we loved, and this is a real person with a real family. Like I get it. Character. You want to be here for your, popcorn hour, and you want to sit here for all this drama, and it's just like, she felt like it was extremely insulting to have people in there. And I mean, you have to understand that, of course, the public is interested, they care. But there's an aspect of it that you just want to know the details and the juicy details about things. But when she brought that up, and again, it hit home with me.
It's perspective.
Very much. That while we're all fighting to get in there and to get a seat so we can do our jobs and tell the public what's going on, at the same time, it was kind of a double-edged sword because there is so much interest in this, and it's drawn people from all aspects of the community, you know, social media people,
Around the world, right.
influencers, you know, like all that stuff, that there are people that just want to know because they loved her.
Now, real quick before we go to break, this was a question that I wanted to ask earlier, but it just came back to me. Do you think that we will hear from Larry? I know that he is someone who has given interviews in the past before. Obviously, we know that there might potentially be something on the table for him. Obviously, we don't know any of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, before we get any further, though, just so you know, 25 years to life, that's a mandatory sentence.
That's a mandatory sentence.
As far
is
as
not going
what
to be
the
like
prosecution
a knockoff.
could offer
He's
him
not gonna be
to
home
help
the next
give
day.
him,
No.
like a deal, I personally don't see it. Had it been an involuntary or a manslaughter conviction,
It's
then
not gonna
yeah,
get
then maybe
knocked
they
down.
could. So I don't know what they would offer him. At this point, everything's on the table, so I think for him, there's no reason for him to say when he's got this little carrot of maybe someday my appeal would work.
Anything other than pride.
Right.
Just not wanting to admit
To actually confess to it.
But
But that's what I wonder if we might hear from him.
I still think we'll hear from him, though.
I am planning to attempt a jailhouse interview, and you know, we'll see what we get out of him. I think it could be interesting, and I have some tough questions to ask.
Yeah, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, he's somebody that believes so strongly in whatever story he's created in his head that he still feels like he's the victim in all this.
Right.
And just because maybe he did do this is what happened beforehand, and somehow that justifies it.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Okay. Well, Kelly,
Interesting to
Jenny,
see.
thank you guys so much for incredible coverage. Again, I can't stress enough how hard it must be, again, to do all of this without cameras in the courtroom. This is our medium. This is a way that we like to tell a lot of the stories, but you guys really did a fantastic job, and we really do thank you again for all of the coverage and for sitting down with us today for nearly an hour to kind of go through it all. And yet I still find myself with more and more
I know.
questions.
Let's
so
just keep this conversation
Yeah.
going.
we'll do it again soon.